Hey, everybody, welcome to the Energy Impacts Podcast. I'm your host, David Blackman, here with my co-host, Stuart Turley. How you doing, Big Stu?
Hey, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Well, good. Which neighborhood you in today? You're in Oklahoma, right?
I'm still in Oklahoma. I had sewer problems. I felt like I needed to really have solidarity with Washington with all the crap up there.
Well, just hope you've got better people to resolve the situation than they do up in D.C. With us today is a wonderful guest, one of my favorite accounts to follow on X. And if you're not following Dr. Matthew Wielicki, who is calls himself a former academic in exile, one of the best writers about climate alarmism and government policy and the intersection of both, and on X and at his Substack called Irrational Fear. Dr. Wielicki, how are you?
I'm doing well. Great to be here, gentlemen. I'm excited.
Yeah, I am too, man. I've been wanting to talk to you for quite a while. I've followed you on X for well over a year now, and just love your stuff and love the stuff you're doing at Substack. Take a few minutes before we go into the Q&A. Just take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, sure. So, like you mentioned, I call myself an Earth Science Professor-in-exile. So, my background and training is isotope geochemistry, I got a faculty position at the University of Alabama pretty quickly in the Department of Geological Sciences. That was about 2016. And I had just had children, and I was kind of rethinking everything about, the future of my kids. I was no longer thinking about myself. And man, I really started to notice that I really felt like my kids wouldn't have the same future that I had. And it was primarily because of this attack on reliable energy sources. And then to think that all of these developing nations, that these people would stay in poverty because of our, kind of virtue signaling. So I went in to kind of look at the data. I thought, well, if the data must be very strong, if we're willing to sacrifice our kids' futures, then this must be just a blow away, slam dunk scientifically. And I was in the industry, but I stayed a little bit away from climate. I mean, we were indirectly involved. I was doing the isotopes and the geochemistry. They were kind of making the bigger picture. It was always very political and messy. I kind of avoided it my entire time. My advisor, who was a National Academy of Sciences member, was like, we don't do climate. We're not going to get into this. This is just a mess. And so I started to ask some questions that you couldn't ask in academia at the time, and very quickly realized that tenure wasn't a possibility with some of the views I had. And so that's why I kind of consider myself a Earth Science Professor-in-exile. But egg on their face, because they made me much more popular than I ever would have been if I would have stayed.
Well, you are very popular on X. You've got about 10 times the audience that I have, and I'm extremely jealous of that, but I'm trying to catch up here. Stu, on the other hand, has, he's still less than you, but he's got a lot more than I do. I think my stupid handle that I chose, Energy Absurdity, kind of doesn't help me there. But anyway, I want to talk to you today about several recent things you've written. The first is the EPA Endangerment Finding. You had a great post on Substack, and this is something I've written about for years. But I just found your post on your Substack talking about how that endangerment finding was pre-cooked when it was issued in 2009 and didn't undergo the proper rigorous kind of analysis in advance that it should have undergone to make it legitimate. Talk about what you meant, by pre-cooked in that piece.
Yeah, the irony here is crazy, because this is kind of the same what they're claiming that the DOE did recently with Secretary of Energy Chris Wright, who put together a climate panel that wrote that article. He said, oh, this was all done in the back channels and it didn't go through all these reviews. And it turns out that that's exactly what happened with the 2009 endangerment finding. Within months of them getting into office, the internal emails are, this is settled. This is not a discussion. This is a policy that we are implementing right away. This isn't going to go through any sort of review. Nobody's going to get to discuss this. And it's just so ironic. People ask me all the time, is like, how do you have so many things to write about? I'm like, if you just keep your eyes open, the irony out here is amazing. I mean, to have them be claiming that to have done exactly what they did to set this whole thing up, is just remarkable. So it just never went through the review process it should have. This is a values judgment, and the clear benefit to society from cheap, reliable energy, plus a little bit of warming, plus CO2 fertilization, all of it is a net benefit. I mean, there's really almost no observable metric where you would argue that this is somehow endangerment or dangerous. And if that's the case, then dinosaurs were breathing dirty air. I mean, it's just ridiculous on its face. And they knew that going in, and that's why they didn't want to have these discussions, right? They didn't want to have a review process. So they pre-cooked the books. They slid this stuff through really quickly. This was kind of the height of Obama coming in, and it went through the back channels. People were raising red flags. People I'm sure like you and in the energy industry and things like that. That this is going to be the foundational underpinning of all of this future regulation that is going to come down. And I'm exhaling 40,000 parts per million of this dangerous gas as we speak. So it's absolutely absurd. And the fact that they did exactly what they're arguing was done recently in the Department of Energy, I just find it very ironic.
Yeah, and your point about it being the foundational underpinning of this entire suite of both Obama and Biden regulatory regimes on power generation, car emissions, the energy industry, on and on and on it goes. I mean, even the pause on LNG permitting was underpinned by this endangerment finding that Biden put into place. Now that this finding has been rescinded, and of course Trump has already, reversed a lot of what Obama and Biden did, but there's still a lot of pretty major elements of it out there. Aren't they all in jeopardy now? I mean, can any of that stuff survive scrutiny in the courts without this endangerment finding and the Chevron deference being in place?
That was the key right there. So once we saw the Chevron deference fall, then the three-letter agencies are no longer allowed to just interpret the law as they see fit. And so it's going to take an act of Congress as they sit up there and lecture and 40,000 parts per million of CO2 come out their mouth. They're going to have to claim that there's some threshold of CO2 where it becomes dangerous. And we're somehow approaching that threshold. I actually wrote today on my Substack a question: what is the right concentration of CO2?
Oh, that was the next one I wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah, we clearly don't know of an upper threshold. And, I'm sure that there are, the military has studied this in things like submarines. And, up into a few thousand, you do start to have some cognitive decline. But, for plants, maybe 1,100 would be the optimum, 1,000, right? That's what greenhouses go between 800 and 1,000 primarily. They see more yield even if they go higher, but they lose a little bit in taste and nutrients. And so they kind of keep it a little bit lower, primarily for things like that. So, it's what is the correct amount of CO2? Congress is going to have to go there and actually say it and make a number and draw some sort of threshold. I don't think they're going to have the guts to do that. So I don't see any of this stuff standing. But the Chevron was the key that really got the thing rolling, because without Chevron, then EPA is free to do whatever it wants.
Now, I've seen Elon Musk, who I have a lot of respect for in many ways, claim that even as low as 600 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere can do harm to human beings. Is he right about that? It says it can have severe negative health impacts at 600. It can be deadly at 1,000.
Absolutely incorrect. The military, like I said, has done the most of this. I used to carry a little CO2 sniffer into my lecture hall. And I taught a lecture of 352 students, and we're in a room, we're all breathing. By the time we left, the room would be 800 or so parts per million. Yeah. And now some of them are asleep. I don't know if that's because of the CO2 or, that's just how it is in college. But no, there's been a ton of studies on this. If you're walking through the forest during the fall when the leaves are falling, it's probably close to 600 is the average that you're breathing. Most people go and feel refreshed when they take a walk through the forest on a fall day. And so I don't think there's any scientific basis for any sort of biology having issues up until a few thousand parts per million. Mammals evolved 250 million or so years ago, 225 million years ago. We've lived through parts per million that go up to 3,000 or 4,000 and down to 180. So for the biosphere, I don't see any issues. For plants, we know for sure that the optimum for photosynthesis is much higher than it is today.
Stuart, I don't want to just dominate things here.
Oh, no, you're doing great because I've got about 16,000 questions for you, Doctor. When we sit back and take a look, the CO2 endangerment, as David aptly pointed out, that it was used to weaponize LNG against President Trump and saying, hey, wait a minute, we can't export LNG. Holy smokes, Batman. There's 3 questions. How much money has cost consumers by this single ruling? That's question number 1. Question number 2, when we sit back and take a look at how much is going to continue costing consumers because of the energy policies from the UN, the IEA, the World Economic funding of only green energy, the side effect or second order effects are in the trillions. And I mean, how long are we going to put up with this?
Yeah. So first question, man, it's hard to put a number. I think the number is close to 7 trillion in just government spending. But if you think about just the cost of consumer goods, and we talk about affordability now, it seems to be the new buzzword in politics. Affordability is directly related to all of these regulations and hoops that everybody's jumping through because energy underpins the whole system, right? And so if the energy costs go up, then transportation, everything, manufacturing. So it underpins it all. So to think about what prices would be without this is a really fun thought experiment. I'm kind of playing around a little bit to see if there's an inflection point after the 2009 endangerment finding, because, you know, rates are always kind of gradually going up and we're seeing actually in the data that there's quite a few inflection points right around 2009, and the slope changes dramatically. So what was the price of a vehicle, and it was gradually increasing, really starts to increase because of all these hoops that the industry is jumping through. So I actually was giving a talk in Sarasota, Florida recently to a lot of architects and city planners. This stuff is infiltrated into how they build buildings. And they're complaining, we can't build a building for under $300 million. And everybody's throwing their arms up. Why does a building cost $300 million? Because we have to jump through a million infinite hoops. And if you start to dig away the layers, it comes back to the endangerment finding. The building has to be energy efficient, not because it's going to help them with their power bill or anything like that, because it will reduce their carbon footprint, right? And so a lot of this stuff comes, but this is where the real work begins, right? Because now you have what, 17 years of regulations that have been implemented that we have to basically peel back in 2, because who knows what the next administration is going to be. So you got about 2.5 or so, 3 years to peel back 17 years of regulation. So this is where the real work starts, and they're gonna attack it in the courts, right? Climate lawfare is kind of the new battleground now. So we're gonna see them try to hold this stuff up in courts as much as possible. But we got to start rolling back those regulations right away. If the people start to see prices come down because the regulations go away, everybody's going to be on board. You'll see all the politicians switch sides as well, because affordability is how you get elected.
Is there a way that we could also take a look at USAID, how much money the government was actually funding its own destruction? Because if you take a look at the lack of funding now, who is funding this lawfare? Because the lawfare is, again, costing a couple trillion. What's a few trillion between friends? This is almost painful.
This is the climate industrial complex. I mean, this has become big business, right?
The climate industrial complex.
Yeah,
that is
big
a
business.
Subtitle for the podcast right there.
You have to keep the crisis narrative afloat in order to keep the funding spigots open. And so they just will, there's a whole industry that is in cahoots to try to amplify as much of the kind of crisis narrative. And I mean, it's big business now. It's going to be tough to scale it back, but clearly the observational data is on our side.
With Bill Gates going, hey, climate change, I'm off to something else to destroy.
Yeah, but he really is.
And then you have Greta, who is now
she doesn't care anymore.
Yeah,
no, she doesn't care. She's off to something else now.
She's off to being a Palestinian protester in a fake armada. Holy smokes! Who's the poster child now for this mess?
I don't think they have one. I mean, I think it's Dr. Mann.
Al Gore.
Al Gore and Michael Mann.
Holy smokes!
Michael Mann. Yeah. Hey, another thing is you talk about them doubling down, tripling down on the same narrative. because that's what they've got. That's what they're pushing. And it's all about, gaining control over the population from the central government. I think everyone pretty much understands that at this point, who's informed on the subject. But one of the thing, and you wrote about this week too, is that this all led to was the systematic defrauding of the global temperature record at the Met, at NOAA, at other countries' meteorological departments in their governments. Talk about what you wrote about in that piece, because it's really something people need to be more aware of.
Yeah, it took me a long time to get here, because this is really, I really didn't want this to be true. I really want scientists to have integrity and be more interested in protecting the scientific method than their own narrative or whatever is going to bring them the next grant. But it really, I don't know if I trust the global temperature record. I don't even know if global temperature record has a meaning, physical meaning, in terms of, I tell people it's like the average phone number in the phone book. You could dial it and maybe it rings somewhere, but what does it mean? It doesn't really have any physical meaning. Now I don't even know if I really trust it at all. The suppression of past data, like heat waves in the Netherlands, that was recently uncovered. The fact that in multiple cities last year, there were airliners that were having issues that were parked right next to the weather station itself. And you saw 40 minutes, a Delta flight is sitting in Tampa, and the temperature spikes by 3 degrees twice for 4 minutes. And that's the new temperature record for Tampa now, that Tampa reached 100 degrees. And that stuff gets into these data sets. And so I just don't really know how much I trust this. And that's a real sad thing to say, because these are I know a lot of these folks, and I don't think it's nobody's up there pulling the strings, but nobody's also willing to go back and look at the data because it fits their narrative. They're not willing to critique it. So, just kind of, I know we all know it's maybe fake and doesn't really mean anything, but look, it's making headlines in the news, and it's just the lack of speaking up by the community to say, hey, if we want to the public's trust, we should go back and look at all this data and make sure we're not suppressing anything and be as open and transparent as possible. And they're the exact opposite. You start to ask these questions and they want to string you up on the stake because you're a heretic.
Early in the Obama administration, 2009, and I'll let you go after this, Stu. We had a congressman from San Antonio here in Texas named Lamar Smith, who was the chairman of the House Science and Oversight Committee. And he held hearings on the Obama administration's efforts within NOAA and NASA to revise the temperature records in the United States in order to suppress the heat waves of the 1930s and other previous heat waves, and to make it look like we've had this rapid temperature rise in the United States. And it was all a part of supporting that endangerment finding and the efforts by the Obama administration to implement their cap and trade system, which thank God failed, or it would have cost us trillions of dollars more. But the point of me saying this is, what did Lamar Smith get for trying to expose the truth about what was happening there? He got run out of Congress, got run out of town by the media. And so it's not just ordinary people who are afraid to speak up about it. It's also members of Congress, because they don't want to be the next Lamar Smith, right? And so I keep hoping someone in Congress, James Comer or somebody, some honest broker, will take a look at this and do a real complete review of the temperature record, because it's what we see now from NOAA and NASA is not accurate. And I think, obviously you know that, and I know Stu knows that. Anyway, go ahead.
I think it was harder back then to really speak out against this stuff.
Yeah.
And particularly right in the late 90s, when the first IPCC comes out, we don't have a ton of data. And so these predictions are kind of untestable. And so it's like, okay, well, we better look out. Well, now we're, 30 years later, and we have great observational data. And it's just, that all of these catastrophic predictions just don't come true. And now we can start talking about it. And it seems like, people are starting to open up a little bit more. But yeah, it was a real tough time there for a while.
Yeah.
There's two sets of temperature. There's three things that really drive me nuts. I interviewed a scientist that actually took a look at how they were changing the numbers on the global temperature, how we are getting warmer. And they've manipulated the data on about 9 sensors. All it took was 9 sensors in Antarctica and swing those off. All of a sudden, the world's getting warmer based off of these changes. Holy smokes, Batman. Then you take a look at putting where are the thermostats and the temperature gauges. Are they sitting next to an air conditioning unit pumping out air? And I've got following a guy going around the country finding these things next to a heater, putting out a cooking vent. I mean, some of these places that they're doing false numbers. This is absolutely despicable.
And that violates NOAA's own writing, because they have requirements of how these things should exist.
I'm old enough to I met Noah when he built the ark. No, this is absolutely disgusting that we're even having this conversation, that our government we can't trust. I want to give Secretary Chris Wright a shout out, because he just warned the IEA again and said, guys, if you're not going to be putting out real information, we're going to defund you like we defunded the UN, and the UN started going, well, we're not going to make our budget numbers. Yay, we're not the world's banker anymore. We're broke.
He's a subscriber to the Substack, and I've had an honor to speak to him a couple times, and so just on the phone. And I mean, he's got the right idea. He gets it. And we're very happy that, I mean, we're going to be very thankful.
He's been on our podcast. He's been on mine at least 4, and David's interviewed him several times, and we're trying to get him back on. He is cool
it's hard
guy.
to catch him these days.
I think he's a busy man.
Yeah. Another one you wrote recently that I really loved, and I think makes some really tremendous points that people need to understand, is the piece you did a few weeks ago called "Where Are the Climate-Related Disasters?" You know, you talk about observational data that we have. We have all these years of observations now, in which claims about hurricanes and flooding and all these different things, sea level rise, simply don't support the claims by Al Gore and others. Talk about that.
Yeah, so warming was never the problem. I think, no honest scientist thought that 1880 was the ideal temperature. That's the end of the little ice age. This is cold times, crops are failing. So this nobody considered that an ideal temperature. So warming was never the problem. Most people probably admitted that warming would be a little bit of benefit, but it was all of these feedbacks. It was these enormous feedback systems that were there. The sea level rise would swamp tiny island nations. And then, we would have catastrophic hurricanes, supercharged climate fueled hurricanes, and all of these things. Well, we've had a great data set. The Center for the Research and the Epidemiology of Disasters out of Brussels, they keep a database. This was the primary database for this kind of IPCC and climate alarmism. And what they were doing was they were plotting this from the 70s on. Well, the emergency database system came out and said, look, guys, you can't do that. You have to now click a button if you want the pre-2000 data, because anything pre-2000 suffers from what we call reporting bias, right? In 1983, if there was a flood in Ethiopia, it didn't get reported in Brussels, but today it does. We're all interconnected. And so if you plot from 2000 on, where the database says, look, we pretty much now have a good, accurate account. There's no artifacts in this data. There's just no increase.
Yeah.
Oh, is that mine? There's no increase in either of these. Sorry, I got feedback on my.
Oh, no.
There, sorry, that's me. And so we don't see an increase. We don't see an increase in hurricanes. We don't see an increase in extreme weather. We don't see an increase in extreme temperature. There are heat waves that have increased, but that's primarily in cities. That has to do with urban heat island. And so, none of this, the feedback systems that were supposed to be driving the catastrophism are occurring. And if that's not happening, then warmth is just a net benefit for all of us.
This whole thing is also, we've ruined almost several generations of kids in school. And I really want to know, I'd like to put all these people in jail that lied about things, because I'm held to a different standard with my website, my Substack, my podcast. I get people getting all grumpy when I say the instead of the. And now we've got kids that are absolutely mush. I've tried to have a conversation with several of my family members that are kids. The climate, we're going to die. Whoa, time out. Bill Gates said it's okay. We're not going to die. How you doing? How do we fix this?
Yeah, I mean, we have to have a little empathy. These kids have had this stuff pounded into their brains since they were tiny. I remember reading to my 4-year-old, and this is now 2020 or so, and I'm really starting to get nervous and starting to speak out about this stuff because I was talking to a lot of the students, but I'm reading and there's climate narratives interwoven into these kids books, these brand new kids books that make it sound like humans are parasites. Like, the ultimate thing would just be extinction, it seems like, because that's the only way we have zero impact. And so many of the students, especially during COVID, were talking to me about their anxiety levels, and this was one of the top ones. But once they got the information, once they saw a lot of this data, it was a huge relief to them. So if we can get them the information, they want to know that the planet's not going to end in 10 years. They're tired of being told that they're parasites on the planet and that they're ruining everything. So it's just that it's just hard to get them the information. They're just bombarded with these headlines just constantly about climate crisis. But I agree with you. It's a huge problem. And unfortunately, that's part of the game plan that they've had all along, is if you can elicit this kind of scared and fearful response early, you'll start to have behavioral changes later on. And that's how you can drive policy.
I have the original plans from Noah since I met him, and I'm going to go ahead and start building an ark in my backyard just to drive these people nuts. And I can't wait to get my backhoe going and get my, what are you doing? Oh, I'm building an ark because we're going to die and we're going to flood. So I mean,
Bible tale, Stu's Ark.
I don't know. Al Gore told me the oceans are boiling, so I don't know if you're going to be.
That's true. Yeah. What that of course was repeated by Antonio Guterres, our chairman at the United Nations, Secretary General, whatever he calls himself. Have we ever had a what's the word I'm looking? A more hyperbolic chief at the UN than Antonio Guterres? I mean, this guy, the highway to hell, global boiling, all this stuff he comes up with. I always wonder how he's going to top himself next time he speaks, right? And it seems he's kind of run out of the ability to do that, though. He didn't manage to do it down in Brazil in November.
This is a feature, not a bug. This is the game plan. This is they've been working with social scientists, and they know, especially if you look at the difference between, for example, what the IPCC working group writes and what the policy or summary for policymakers is. They're very different, and they use very different terminology. They get social scientists. They want to elicit an emotional response. That's the goal, regardless of what the data is. It doesn't matter. The narrative has been preset, and let's use verbiage that elicits an emotional response. And so, the oceans have slightly warmed doesn't play as well as the oceans are literally boiling. I was like, man, that's
one of the best at talking about that, what you just mentioned, that the data doesn't match what's actually in, or the data in the IPCC report doesn't match the rhetoric to Stephen Koonin, of course, who was involved at the IPCC on behalf of the Obama administration. Back when all this madness about the endangerment finding was happening, I posted a brief video clip of him debating this Texas A&M professor whose name I'm going to forget now. It's embarrassing.
Dessler, Andrew Dessler.
The guy's an embarrassment. But I put that up on X, and it went completely viral. People are really, really interested in this subject, right? I mean, they really are. And people really do want true and accurate information. Do you feel like we're getting to a tipping point on this, maybe in our favor finally after all these years?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's with AI and the realization that energy isn't just something that we can kind of plateau. The U.S. hasn't essentially produced any new energy for a long time, decades. Per capita, we've gone down pretty dramatically. So this idea that energy is just a little bit of life. No, it's the underpinning of everything. And with AI coming online, that's why Bill Gates changed his tune for sure. That's why Microsoft's trying to open 3 Mile Island. This is just a realization that for some reason everybody didn't have but us. And now they're clearly coming around to it. And so this is the momentum is big, but a new administration can come in and really start to swing things back the other way. So you got to peel back as much of this as possible, as soon as possible. And then it'll be just much harder to kind of reshape it all, because once people see that it's all, this is the costs are crazy and it's due to energy.
Dr. Wielicki, are you available to talk to our Congress people? Because there are some of them that are absolutely dumber than rocks. And we saw some of them in Germany this past week with taking word salads to a whole new level. In fact, I could not believe that Kamala Harris could be beaten at a word salad, but I believe she's got.
I think AOC did it. Yeah,
she did. Wow!
It's so fitting that it was. It's so fitting that it was in Germany too, who's basically committed economic suicide. So it was very fitting.
My goodness.
What are your thoughts about Gavin Newsom striking a deal with Octopus out of the UK for an investment? Can two of the most expensive state in the United States strike a deal with the most expensive country that has energy in the world with one of the most bankrupt companies for an investment? Can they solve the energy crisis?
I love that. Did you see recently? I saw that the California's importing oil from the Bahamas.
From the Bahamas, yes.
Yeah, they're shipping it through the Panama Canal. That's no emissions released there, and all the way up to California. So, wow. I mean, what a great. I grew up in California. What a perfect example of terrible policy and what it will cost just regular consumers, everyday consumers. Not to think of trying to manufacture something in California or build anything. So. The irony here is just, it's too much.
I'll tell you what, I should have saved out the AOC thing, but we actually could cover it in about 3 seconds and just show a picture of her, because you would get that much out of it. It was that bad. But having Governor Newsom, last year, I tracked tankers from Russia that went to India. They got transformed into jet fuel. The jet fuel was then sent from India to California. California had a crisis where 42% of their jet fuel was missing. In a refinery. They now have had most of their pipelines cut, and the main pipeline was losing $2 million a month. They're now trying to save their oil system by allowing 2,000 permits. Those 2,000 permits will last about 5 seconds. You cannot. I think that they may. Katie Grimes is the editor-in-chief at the California Globe, and I believe she's probably right that they have successfully killed the oil and gas industry in California, and they will be importing diesel and gasoline and jet fuel at $10 a gallon.
It's crazy. I mean, it's just, but it's good because we need a state to show and hold up and say, look, don't do it like this. This is not the way you want to do it. Look at what's happening. Look at all the industry that's left. And so, people ask me, like, why did you leave California? I always tell people, the best part about, I spent a lot of time in Southern California. The best part about Southern California was the only part that the government can control is the weather. But everything else is pretty much sucks. But the weather is great. And I get that. I totally get that. If the government could control that more, they probably would screw it up. But,
That's for a whole nother podcast. I got a few on that one.
One last topic I want to ask you about. You posted on X today, just to prove I read your X everywhere, about this study that came out indicating that the big wind farms in the North Sea and elsewhere are actually having a significant impact on altering ocean currents, and now could be a problem that could impact ultimately the Gulf Stream and its warming effect on the UK. What do you think about that?
Who would have thunk putting giant artificial structures in the path of ocean currents would disrupt ocean currents and wind currents and make these wakes behind it? And they're talking about messing with the marine ecosystems, and all of this stuff will go into a headline that says, see, Climate change is messing all this stuff up. Give us more money for more big wind farms. It's such a I always tell people the best climate solution would be to do nothing, because most of these climate solutions are actually screwing up things more than they're solving them. So doing nothing would be a better, and everybody's like, oh, I can't do nothing. I'm like, I promise you it would be better for the planet. It would be better for you. It'd be cheaper. And so here's just another perfect example. I mean, who would have thunk, right?
Yeah, and that's the biggest problem with this whole, I spent years writing about the energy transition that it turned out wasn't happening. So I had to change the name of my own Substack to eliminate that part of the name. But, a big part of the energy transition and the whole problem with it that I kept writing about and trying to get people to listen to is that the alternatives that are being proposed don't work. Okay. They can't displace fossil fuels, which is why it hasn't happened. Do you think, to me, the future is nuclear? If you want to get the zero carbon emission energy, the future has to be nuclear. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I agree 100% for baseload, for sure. For the baseload, that I think that's what it should be. It would make oil and gas much cheaper for things like heating and transportation, because we wouldn't be burning them for electricity. You could supplement a little bit with solar here and there in the daytimes. I've got some solar panels on my roof here in Colorado because we have a ton of sunshine. I didn't do it to lower my carbon footprint. I did it because Excel keeps hiking their rates all the time. Every year they go up by 8% or something because they're jumping through all these crazy regulations. And so, they have to raise rates on me. And so I figured, well, I'll just do it economically. It made sense to me. So, with modern reactors and essentially no risk of meltdown. So modern reactors have a negative reaction coefficient, meaning that when they start to melt down, they shut off. Yeah. In Chernobyl, it was the exact opposite. It's a positive reaction coefficient. So as it starts melting down, the reaction keeps speeding up, more heat, the whole thing starts to melt and everything like that. And so, but I think, AI sees that. These big tech companies see that. The problem is the regulations right now are really stifling for new modern reactors. Even these small modular reactors need to be built with something like 6 feet of concrete. So, it just kills anybody that wants to build a small one. And then there's, all the regulations for bigger ones. And so, unfortunately, it's the same kind of climate folks that are anti-nuclear. So I don't really know what they want. You need a base load. You need to be able to provide power at night and when wind's not blowing. Batteries are absolutely environmentally disgusting. That's not a solution. So I think nuclear is the only way.
Yeah, I mean, what we found and others have found, I think, is that a lot of the advocacy groups for wind and solar get money from wind and solar to be advocacy groups, right? And so it's this self-perpetuating process based on money. And so what they want is wind and solar to the exclusion of everything else, and they'll make up the talking points as they need to.
I wonder if we could do a kids book after this podcast, and then that way when we have the kids book, we open it up and show a wind farm. This is a wind farm killing all the right whales on the East Coast, and then flip the page. And then this is the lifespan of a windmill that is now, I calculated it out, between 3 and 5 years, they become fiscally unsound. They're unsound from day one. And at 8 years, the rates have gone up at every single wind farm in the United States. Guess what we are now missing? $89 billion liability for land reclamation starting point on the wind turbine fleet in the United States. This is a major problem that is not being talked about.
Isn't it ironic that Greenpeace started to protect that same whale from the same seismic surveys that oil and gas were doing to look for oil and gas that they're doing now to figure out where to put the foundations of the wind turbines? Exactly the same seismic surveys. And for some reason, they're all for this one, but they weren't for the other ones. So the irony is amazing.
I got a lot of traction when I said oil saved the whales the first time, but let's do it again. Let's see if oil and gas can save it the second time.
I bet you a whale would thank all of us. Every energy person a whale would say, thank you. Now they're not burning me in candles anymore.
Well, I got to thank you. 5 years ago, it was a lonely place to be. advocating against all this craziness. And I don't feel real lonely anymore. There's a lot of us doing it now, and you're one of the best. And I want you to, before we go here, take a minute, just let people know where they can find you and follow what you're doing. And we'll include it all, of course, in the show notes, and make sure people can find you.
I've got your website showing here, International Fear. Substack. Irrational.
Yep.
Irrational. Sorry, I speak Oak Tex. So
He speaks Oak Tex.
So
that's Oklahoma and Texas mixed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Substack's Irrational Fear, but really, I mean, a lot of the articles go up on X as well. So just at Matthew Wielicki, and I give you the gist of it for free. And then if you wanted a little bit of a deeper dive, there's a subscriber section for folks. But just even if you're just subscribed for free, you'll get most of the gist of it. A lot of the plots, a lot of peer-reviewed articles that just people don't want to talk about because they don't fit the narrative. So you always hear about this consensus. And I'm like, well, geez, there's all these other papers you guys seem to ignore very conveniently for your consensus. And so, yeah, but X and Substack are the two best places.
When are you going to start your podcast? Because you see, I have a face for radio, but you are very gifted in your articulation, especially with your Substack. You could turn on a podcast very quickly.
Yeah, I used to do a little bit weekly with Wielicki, but then I would fall off and I wouldn't have one for a couple of weeks, and people would get mad at me, and then
that's my problem too.
Yeah. It's a little self-motivation problem.
I can. We ended up the year at number 4. We're right now currently number 4 globally in energy podcasts by FeedSpot. I'm a little surprised by that one, considering the other top 10 were all wind and solar. I don't have how that happened until that one, but it's kind of like I think I snuck in.
Well, like David said, it's getting less lonely. I mean, people are. It feels good because people are starting to at least have these discussions. I mean, you couldn't even have a discussion like this before, so
you really couldn't. With that, I think we need to wrap this up, Big Stu. I got a conflict here in a few minutes.
All right, yeah, just an Okie from Muskogee, but I'm actually a Texas resident, spending half my time in Texas. I prefer Texas, so.
Well, thank you, Matthew. We need to do this again, and I hope you're up for it. Just really enjoyed meeting you and talking with you today.
Absolutely, thank you, gentlemen.
Keep up the great work, Stu. You too, buddy.
All right, see you soon.